and welcome back to the TLDR News Podcast. I'm Jack Kelly, and this week I'm joined by Ben Blissett.
Hello.
And Rory Taylor.
Hello.
How are we doing?
Good. It's a big day today. There's a lot going on.
It is.
To discuss.
It's a sad day because last week we promised that the whole gang would be back together. Yeah. And Zach is next door, but just isn't here.
Yeah.
So apologies for that. Next week.
But it is a
big week. What are the headlines, Ben?
We just thought today we might skip the beginning underreported stories because there is so much going on. And effectively this all stems from the Suella Braverman being sacked the other day as Home Secretary.
Which we discussed last week.
We did discuss last week, and I think we did
I wasn't here last week. I forgot about that.
You weren't, no. But I think I did say that.
You listened though, surely, Rory?
Of course, yeah. It was annoying because I was going to, if I was in last week, I was going to predict that David Cameron would be the new Foreign Secretary.
But it was the obvious pick.
Yeah. But we did say that we thought she'd go relatively soon, and she has. And there's just been a lot of stuff that's come on the back of that. Obviously, David Cameron, out of absolutely nowhere, is now the Foreign Secretary. Yeah. He's been he's not living in a shed, but he certainly said... Well, no, because he had this whole shed, didn't he, a few years ago that he spent like tens of grand on to do writing in.
Sure.
So he's been... in a shed.
He's been living in a shed, and now he's back.
And now for 7 years.
Do you think that's the shocking thing with his living situation?
No, I don't think it. No, well, no. I just thought it'd be sort of a humorous way of saying he's been doing nothing.
I like it. Yeah. Has he written any books?
He has, yeah.
Surely.
He wrote memoirs. That's why he got the shed. To write in, yeah.
Okay, fair.
Yeah, of course.
We bought a copy of that too. We helped fund his shed.
Did we?
Yeah, there's one copy next door.
Oh, I won't be reading it.
Whoa.
Sorry, David.
Neutrality. You're not even back in the shed.
Okay. No, I know.
Okay,
Apologies.
sorry, continue.
So Suella Braverman went, David Cameron's back.
Yeah.
She wrote, and I hope we'll get onto this in a second, but I'll just run through a few of the things now. She wrote a resignation letter, which is incredibly damning. I mean, probably one of the most damning resignation letters of a cabinet minister that I can think of.
Sure.
Obviously, there's been the reaction to that. But then also separately to that, there's been the Rwanda decision this morning about the lawfulness of the government's plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. Then there's also the vote this evening on the King's speech, and there's a couple of interesting things going on there. So there's a lot to discuss.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll get into all of it, but I think it's probably worth starting with, Suella Braverman being sacked and her subsequent resignation letter.
Okay, let's start there.
Yeah. I can continue talking.
No, I think it is worth starting there. It's something that feels like it's been a long time coming.
Yeah.
Because, well, firstly, she has been sacked before.
Yes.
But then she made her way back into cabinet pretty quickly after as Home Secretary. She's been this, I'll use the phrase, a thorn in Rishi Sunak's side. I think that's fair. Basically, his whole time, even though she's on his team, people have said she's been running a kind of shadow leadership campaign. And it got to a point where the divisions just were too much, and she went one step too far, and now she's finally gone. But, well, yeah, I was going to say the resignation letter, I guess technically she didn't resign, she was sacked. But there was a lot of speculation about this letter, that they usually do an exchange of letters when someone leaves cabinet. And there were rumours that she was waiting to release it at an opportune time to maximally damage Rishi Sunak. So this is one of those cases where someone has gone, but they don't say, I'm sorry to be leaving, but I'll continue supporting you. This was, I'm not sorry to be leaving. You're terrible, basically. She went in on his judgment, his policies. She said he betrayed her. He made some promises to her that he didn't live up to, apparently. And she said, basically, you need to rapidly change course.
I mean, just at the start of the letter one, the first thing she goes in for, she really goes for the jugular. She goes, despite the fact that you've been rejected by a majority of party members in the summer leadership contest and have no mandate to be Prime Minister, I agreed to support you. Then goes on to list an agreement she claims she made with Sunak to serve in his cabinet. And she says there were 4 things that they broadly agreed to do as conditions for her to be Home Secretary. The first is to reduce overall immigration. The second is to include what she calls notwithstanding clauses in new legislation to stop the boat. What that means is that they wanted to create new legislation that have clauses that disregard the ECHR and the HRA's theme. The third is to deliver the Northern Ireland Protocol, and the fourth is to protect biological sex and safeguard single-sex spaces. She then goes on to say that he manifestly and repeatedly failed to deliver each and every one of these key policies. And just in case that wasn't damning enough, she said that part of the reason that this that he did this was either his distinctive style of government means that he's incapable of doing so, or, as I surely must conclude now, you never had any intention of keeping your promises. I mean, it's just a litany of just damning statements.
She effectively declared war on him, really.
Yeah, it really has. And when you said that she didn't say in the letter that she's, will be supporting.
Yeah.
I think she did 3 pages, and the very last line was something like, I'll be keen to support the government for as long as. And it's like, that's just untrue. That's just, you've done 3 pages of why you think he's a bad leader. And
I think it's interesting that she effectively suggests in that letter that she was instrumental in Rishi Sunak becoming leader by lending him her support. I might be misremembering things, or maybe I just don't know what went on behind the scenes, but I don't remember that being the case.
I think I don't remember any specific instance of that being the case, but obviously when Sunak came in, he didn't have a mandate. It's true that he wasn't. He was rejected, and he needed to have the support of the wider party. And with that, he kept a lot of the key appointments in place, which included
Suella Braverman.
And I think that to be fair, there's a lot of that I think is maybe a little bit oversold, but I do think it's probably true that had she not given him her support, he would have found it very difficult in the immediate weeks of becoming leader to keep the party together.
It kept the right of the party happy for some amount of time.
I mean, look at the chaos that this is causing now, and this is once he's had time to shore things up. Can you imagine what that would have been like earlier on? So I can understand that there are parts of that I think she's maybe got a little bit of a grandiose sense of self in it. But I think on that one, I think she is probably, to be fair, quite right. She also moves later on to discuss Sunak's failures to deal with anti-Semitism at the minute with the. Which is interesting as well, and again, she sort of doesn't hold back on that, saying that as on so many issues, you sought to put off tough decisions in order to minimise political risk to yourself. Service requires bravery and thinking of the common good. It's not about occupying the office in and of itself, and urging him to change course. I mean, again, it's just this isn't common with resignation letters. This is out of the ordinary. But the backlash to this has also been quite interesting. The sort of fallout from it. It's a lot of people have obviously interpreted it as a way of, if not launching a leadership bid now, positioning herself to be in one when Sunak inevitably goes.
I mean, a lot of these things that she's bringing up as issues she has with Sunak, promises that have been broken, are core talking points within certainly her faction of the Conservative Party, which doesn't mean that they're inauthentic, obviously, because it makes sense that she cares about kind of trans issues, like migrants, kind of the pro-Israel side of the current conflict, etc. All those things make perfect sense. But equally, the fact she's mentioning them all is a bit like, come on.
It's like her setting.
Hey guys, look, here are the things that I would be doing. I don't know.
Yeah, it is really obvious. It's really obvious, as you say, that she's going for all of these talking points. Yeah. I think Alison Pearson from the Telegraph described the way the letter was written as if she'd typed it in fire, which is an interesting quote. But I do think, as you say, it's not only trying to be incredibly damning, but also trying to set out her own stall.
Yes. On every talking point you could imagine.
Exactly. And this, to be fair to her, it seems to be really riling up the right of the party. And there's obviously been talk since then of letters going in. And there's been a lot of supportive words towards Braverman and against her sacking. And obviously this is only made worse for Sunak by the fact that he brought Cameron on, who is obviously seen as more of a moderate within the party. And it's seen as him trying to sort of shift and maybe alienate the right of the party a little bit.
So let's talk about Cameron briefly, and then we should loop back to the division, because you're right. The Cameron element, one part of the upset on the right is the fact Braverman's out. The kind of salt in the wound for them is the fact that Cameron is being put in that position. So do we want to talk about Cameron quickly, and then we'll loop back to how those two things tie together?
So David Cameron's the new Foreign Secretary. Yes. So James Cleverly moved from Foreign to Home Secretary, which I think is probably the worst, going from the best job to the worst job in government. And then David Cameron flown into the House of Lords to be Foreign Secretary.
On Monday morning as well. It's incredible how quickly he was given that.
It's almost like it shouldn't be that easy.
Yeah.
Like, how are you able to make someone a lord for life that quickly?
When you think about how long it takes for the resignation honours list to go through and things, like this was rapid.
Yeah.
But anyway, so he's in now, Foreign Secretary. This was. There's so many things to say.
Sure.
So many things to say about it, but it's definitely a signal back to more centrist conservative politics, I guess. There's not really any other way of seeing it, I think. I think Sunak will be hoping that this will kind of appease or at least kind of dampen the worries of the blue wall conservatives who think the party have gone a bit too far to the right and might be thinking about voting Lib Dem.
Yeah.
So it's shoring up that base. But then some people have said this is Sunak just abandoning the red wall and other places they might want to win and just going into a purely defensive mode of trying to win those their kind of homeland. I think one of the most interesting things to me is that Sunak had just a few weeks ago, he did that speech, or a few months, in the conference, whenever it was, effectively saying the last 30 years have been failure on Conservative and Labour sides. I'm the changed candidate now.
Yeah.
It's, if you want something different, vote for me. And now he's brought back in the Prime Minister from 2010 to 2016. That is
one of the people he was just
exactly,
attacking.
Yeah, I don't know how he can frame himself as the changed candidate, given that he's done that. There's also some anger from Conservative MPs who effectively said, well, look, by bringing in someone who was outside of politics, you're saying that none of us 300 and whatever MPs were good enough to be Foreign Secretary.
Yeah.
Which is
it's
not a great.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And that's not a great endorsement when you're the leader of that party and you're kind of making that claim.
I've heard so much discussion about how obviously experienced David Cameron is, he understands the office. But just to be clear, I mean, I know that the Prime Minister obviously has a lot of oversight of foreign issues, but he hasn't been Foreign Secretary. And more importantly, he hasn't been in politics for 7 years. So much has changed. Like, if you think back to how government operated and the professionalism within government, whether you agree with it or, agree with how they're acting or not, but of the 2010 to 15-16 period.
Sure.
It's a different world. And he's not been in and amongst that. The debates that we're having, the social issues, even like the international stage has completely changed. War in Ukraine, war with Israel and Gaza, social issues like transgender issues are a lot more prominent now. This whole like woke divide, the divide within the Conservative Party itself. All of this is true now, and Cameron has been outside of that. He's not been a journalist.
He's been in a shed.
He's been in a shed. So I just this argument that people put forward that he's got a lot of experience. Yes, of course he's had experience of Prime Minister, and I'm sure that will be useful. But I do think it can be overstated, and I do think that the thing that people aren't talking about is the fact that he's just been out of the political sphere for so long.
I think there are world leaders and diplomats who will see him like rather than elevating a random Tory MP to being Foreign Secretary, I guess Sunak sees there is value in having someone who's recognisable and has some kind of weight behind them. He hasn't been Foreign Secretary, but Prime Minister for 6 years is pretty strong background.
Yeah.
And also, I think he, as Foreign Secretary, you can kind of avoid the more domestic issues and the divides in the party, because anytime a journalist asks you about it, you can kind of say, look,
because you can avoid scrutiny by sitting in the Lords.
Well, there's that as well.
That's also true.
You can effectively say, look, I'm focused on these pressing global issues. I'm not going to talk about this.
And that's part of the reason why you say that Foreign Secretary is such a good job and home is such a bad job. It's because, especially with ongoing wars, you can deflect so easily. Just throw your backing behind Sunak a little bit and then move on.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to avoid a vote, you can fly to somewhere across the world and not do it.
Very true.
But equally, he's a controversial appointment as well, not just because he's been away for 7 years and stuff, but the various lobbying scandals, Green Sill, and then also this one about this port project that's part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. He's apparently been lobbying for investment for that.
I thought you said pork thing.
No,
I thought you were making a
port project.
Oh, that too.
Very different. So he's not without baggage, in this job, and I think that could cause some trouble. But in terms of, sorry, do you want to jump in?
I was going to move it on slightly.
Right.
So if you've
I was going
to
say, I don't think it's one of these things where you can ask the question: is this going to damage Sunak? Is this going to help him? I don't think it will damage him, but it's not going to change the kind of arithmetic going ahead.
No one's significantly changing their voting decisions based on David Cameron.
So. Yeah.
No.
Well, maybe not no one. I guess Braverman is particularly unpopular with more centrists, so maybe Maybe.
I think rather than the appointment itself having an impact, if this is a general shift back towards the centre, then that could have an impact. Yeah.
I just as well, when I've been speaking to people that I know that are sort of interested but only tangentially in politics, the thing that people often ask is, oh, but where's he an MP for? And it's like, well, I know we referenced this earlier, but it's worth just talking about it a little bit more, which is that he isn't an MP for anywhere. He was the MP for Witney. He stepped down after, he stepped down as Prime Minister. I think he continued as an MP for a very short amount of time, then stepped down. So he's not been there. So obviously he's been appointed to the Lords. And it is possible to be a minister and even a cabinet minister in the Lords. It's very uncommon. The last time a foreign secretary was in the Lords was Lord Carrington under Thatcher, who presided over the Falklands War. But that was in the 80s. It's incredibly uncommon. And part of that is that you don't get scrutiny within the Commons from elected people. His authority for the foreign ministry doesn't really derive from anywhere, and he doesn't get the same level of scrutiny as you would get in the Commons. You're being held to account by people who, for a large part, it's a part-time job, being a member of the House of Lords. You're not elected. You're not really tied into the news cycle by virtue of the fact that you're there for life.
Yeah.
The level of scrutiny that he's going to be subjected to is going to be a lot lower than other foreign secretaries. And any time that anything needs to happen within the Commons, any time the foreign minister questions anything, it'll have to be a junior minister within the Foreign Office that's going to have to go and take his place. I don't know. I like to think that they haven't done this as a way to avoid scrutiny. I don't think that is the motivation, but it is a byproduct of that decision.
Sure.
And whether they've considered that and that is part of the decision making is still an open question.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's. I don't think it's good for scrutiny. I really don't.
For sure. So those are the two sides of this coin. Braverman being kicked out, annoying the right. Cameron being brought in, annoying the right. And we obviously talk about the kind of maybe electoral advantages to maybe tacking back towards the centre, picking up some more kind of southern Tory voters that maybe have been pulled towards Lib Dem of late. But equally, you're going to be seeing right-wingers both within the party and also right-wing voters being upset by this. And you mentioned this already, Ben, obviously less of no confidence potentially going in and just generally more division in the party. So what have we seen already in reaction to this?
Well, there was a meeting almost immediately after of the right of the Conservative Party after Suella Braverman went, and they were trying to consider what their response would be.
Sure.
Then, and we'll get onto this later, but there's been the Rwanda decision, and on the back of that, there's been another discussion with them.
Yeah.
It seems like there's been a lot of sort of lip service paid to Suella Braverman, which is obviously designed to suggest that there is support for her, and that to try and signal to the government that this was the wrong decision getting rid of her. And the other thing is that it's not that she's just been gotten rid of. She's not been replaced by someone on the right. David Cameron's been brought in, who is of the centre. So there's been a lot of sort of lip service so far. There's been Dame Andrea Jenkins is the only person that we know of so far who has publicly put on the record that she's put a no confidence letter in. But there's been suggestions today that there's been an additional 6 that's been sent in. And there's obviously been the classic chatter on Twitter and amongst journalists that that there's going to be a concerted effort within the next few weeks of the right of the Conservative Party to try and force a vote of no confidence, which would require 53 MPs. So 6 isn't all that impressive yet. But I suppose their point is that they're not doing it yet.
Yeah.
They're still waiting on Sunak's press conference later about the Rwanda decision, and they're sort of holding back at the minute. But I think just given the level of support being shown, given the fact that this has coincided with Rwanda, given that he's made things worse with the right by appointing Cameron, I do think that I see it as likely that in the next few weeks that the letter threshold could be reached. I think Sunak will win it comfortably. I don't think there's any chance that he's going to be unseated as Prime Minister, but I do think that I think this is the biggest threat that he's had of a no confidence vote of his premiership.
Rory?
I think absolutely the biggest threat. But it would just be crazy for Conservative MPs to change leader again.
But
that's where we're at.
And I think if I was Suella Braverman, I would think if I want to be leader, you're best to wait for Rishi Sunak to lose the next election and say, look, he lost because he went back to the centre. I'm going to come in and do all the stuff we should have done.
But then she has to wait 5 years for an election. So the question is whether she does it now because she wants to contest an election and get in early. Also, if they lose, post 97, you had a string of Tory leaders because they couldn't hold the party together. So the
Tory leader after the next election probably isn't going to be the leader going into the following
election.
Yeah.
So that might be building into her decision of trying to force it now, because if she does become the leader right after Sunak, it's unlikely she's going to make it to an election.
So more division then.
Yeah,
more division.
It's the classic. It's the story that we sort of keep coming back to on this podcast and have done for the last year, which is that the Tories are in this doom spiral of polling's getting worse. They don't know how to fix it. Each of the factions are getting annoyed that it's the other one that's causing the problems, and it's just ripping itself apart. And this is just another symptom of that.
And another issue they're facing is the Rwanda decision, which you mentioned, which is another bad moment for Suella Braverman this week. And is also another thing that's kind of pulling on those tensions between elements of the party. So this is a ruling that came out this morning from the Supreme Court. Do you want to have a quick overview? I imagine people are vaguely aware of what's happened, but quickly, what is the vibe and what does it mean?
Basically, this was on the government's flagship Rwanda plan, which effectively their aim was to deport asylum seekers who cross the channel, deport them to Rwanda.
Yeah.
It never happened. It still, it won't happen now, but it never happened even after they first announced it because of a long legal process.
Yeah.
And it's gone through the courts, various levels. And now the Supreme Court has finally said it is unlawful because Rwanda is not a safe country to send refugees and asylum seekers to.
Sure.
So the government can't kind of really go any further up the legal system there. So that leaves the government in a tricky situation where do they just say, look, fair enough, we won't do it. We've got other elements to our immigration policy. We'll just focus on those. Or do they kind of do what some of the Tory right have already started doing? One MP, Brendan Clark-Smith, I think he shared the Enemies of the People headline again. Lee Anderson, deputy chair of the Tory party, has said they should just send the flights anyway and ignore the Supreme Court. These are really serious things that are being said.
Pick up on that.
Yeah,
that's breaking the law. Is what that is. I'm not in any way having a go at you, but it's just the way that the right always try and portray this of ignoring the Supreme Court judgment is breaking the law. That's what that is,
and breaking international law as well.
It is wild the lack of respect the Supreme Court gets in the UK. Like, I feel like in the US, if the Supreme Court comes to a ruling, it's like, damn, they've made a decision and this is what's happening.
I think people
here it's like,
forget we have a Supreme
who said
Court.
that? Like, it doesn't matter. We're the government. Anyway,
it's this duality of we don't like the government making decisions. But then when the Supreme Court goes, you're right, they shouldn't be, people go, well, you can't tell them that. It's like,
and it's also not even like they're making a decision. They're enforcing the laws that the government have approved or passed or whatever. Like, this isn't some sinister third body getting involved. This is the government's own rules. And if they want to change those rules, that might be unpopular, but like that's the way to do it, not just sending some random flights.
It sparked this whole new discussion. Well, not new, kind of revived this discussion about leaving the ECHR. Which is a big kind of, I think, a misdirection really, because if you actually read the Supreme Court's judgment, they say that effectively the decision was about the fact that you can't send refugees back to a country where they're at risk of persecution. And that includes if you send them to somewhere like Rwanda and then Rwanda sends them back to their home country, you as the first country are responsible for that. So the Supreme Court said this is a core principle of international law and that asylum seekers are protected against it by several international treaties ratified by the UK, not just the ECHR, but the UN Refugee Convention, Convention Against Torture, Convention on Civil and Political Rights, as well as lots of domestic legislation as well. So if we left the ECHR, it still wouldn't be lawful. But then I guess you might get these people saying, well, let's leave the UN.
Let's leave all those other things too.
But the decision was not a decision on whether it was unlawful to just send asylum seekers to another country. It was specifically about Rwanda and whether that was a safe country or not. So they've decided Rwanda is not a safe country. So in theory, the government could come to another agreement with another country, and then we'd probably go through the whole thing again where like people would say, actually, you can't do this. And it'd be like deja vu. But it doesn't rule out the idea of offshore processing or deportation effectively. So that is an option the government might do, and they might say we'll still explore these things. But again, if there's an election in a year's time,
there has to be.
Pretty much. There's no. They can't make any meaningful progress on this really.
I was going to bring up the Lee Anderson thing as well. I just think that's unbelievable. I mean, he's the deputy chair of the party.
He's not just a backbencher. He's second in command of the ruling party.
And it was this precedent set under Johnson that you can say in a prominent position, that your position as government, as the government of the United Kingdom, that you can break the law, that is an option available to you. That is not an option available to you. That should not ever be an option available to a government. And up until this point, up until Johnson, that was not an option available to government. And it's just perpetuating that. And I find the lack of coverage about that, and the fact that certain right-wing papers are covering it as if he's saying,
it's optional.
It's optional, that we'll just disagree with the Supreme Court judgment. You can't. That is not your power. That's why we have separation of powers within this country. That's why the Supreme Court has the power to tell you can't do a thing. Is because you as the government you're not an authoritarian state. You do not have that power. I find that the lack of attention paid to that remarkable, and the deliberate wording by certain papers in this country about that remarkable as well. But that is one thing. But the other MPs, Simon Clarke, etc., saying about trying to leave the ECHR, I do really think that if Sunak doesn't say that he's going to plan that, I think that's going to annoy the right even further on top of this. And I think that part of the reason that we're not seeing more letters sent in at this point is because they're waiting to see whether he commits to that. Waiting to see whether they can exert influence and pressure on him to try and get him to commit to leaving the ECHR. I don't think he will. I think ultimately, I think he knows that that's something that he shouldn't do, and I think that he'll draw a line there. And I think that is another reason why I think a vote of no confidence is likely.
Sure.
Because I think that when he says, no, I'm not going to leave the ECHR, I think that's going to be the time when those on the right pounce.
So there's a lot of issues.
Yeah.
Lots of things going on this week. Suella Braverman finds herself at the centre of so many of them. Is there anything else you want to touch on in this mammoth week of weird news?
Day of news.
Just
one other very quick thing is that just in case there isn't enough happening today, there is the vote on the King's speech later at 7 o'clock today. We're recording this about midday on Wednesday, so we haven't seen this yet. But the SNP have tabled a motion which calls for a ceasefire between in Israel and Gaza. Obviously, Labour's in a particularly odd position in that the leadership is saying that they don't support humanitarian ceasefire. They support instead humanitarian pauses. However, there's a lot of Labour MPs that do back a ceasefire. So the Labour leadership has said that they're not going to be engaging with this SNP motion. They've tried to reassure the Labour MPs that don't worry, we're doing our own amendment at some point. We're having our own motion on this.
Okay.
So you can sort that out.
You can ignore this one.
You can ignore
the
this
SNP one. Doesn't matter.
This is put forward by the SNP.
Okay.
Seen as
we'll do
our
our
own
own
the SNP
later
as well. We'll do our own one. But obviously that doesn't mean. Well, I presume there'll be a lot of Labour MPs that will firstly back a ceasefire over a humanitarian pause. And secondly, won't see the fact that it's by the SNP as being that bad. So the thing to keep an eye on is whether Labour MPs do back that and subsequently what punishment they get for that. Because, it's the King's speech, which is usually seen as like a confidence issue for the government, and Labour will probably see this as an important vote.
Sure.
So if people vote against it, there is a fear tonight that some Labour MPs could lose the whip for voting.
And there's they're expecting like quite a few shadow cabinet ministers to lose, maybe not lose the whip, but just be kicked out of their shadow ministries. I don't know exactly how serious it will be, whether it'll be losing the whip or not. But,
sure.
I think there's despite this attempt to appease them, because it still doesn't call for ceasefire, I think there probably will be quite a few people who break Labour's line on that.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Division across the board.
Yeah.
So much division.
Yeah.
I think we should move on.
Yeah. I think that's probably true.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to the World Leader Leaderboard.
Yes.
Okay, so as always, we'll do our winners and losers of the week. We'll move them around on the board and we'll see where everyone shakes out. Now, this may be the last episode in this current setup. No commitment as to what that sentence means.
No.
But this could be an impactful last chance for the board in its current state. So, Rory, starting with you, who is your winner of the week?
My winner of the week, he's already on the board.
Okay.
I'm going to move him up. It's Pedro Sanchez, the Spanish Prime Minister.
Where is it?
That's him there. So this is a controversial one because I think you could make the argument that he should go up or should go down.
Okay.
My argument that he should go up is that sometime, I think this time tomorrow, he'll probably be Prime Minister. He'll be made Prime Minister of Spain again.
Yes.
I think that's a significant achievement considering he called a snap election having had terrible results in local elections and everyone expected this right-wing coalition to come to power and him to lose. He's managed to forge an agreement with various smaller parties in the Spanish Parliament, including the pro-Catalan independence parties, to support him to become prime minister. But in exchange for an amnesty law, which will effectively grant amnesty to all of those Catalan independence politicians and activists who tried to secede from Spain.
Yeah.
The reason why you could say this is bad for him is because it's sparked big protests, especially from the right of this kind of Spanish political spectrum, who are massively opposed to this. So maybe in the future we'll see how it goes for him. But I think fundamentally he is prime minister. He is about to be made prime minister again. No one really expected that, so that's a good week.
That sounds pretty good.
General. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ben, who's your winner of the week?
Well, it's David Cameron.
Wow.
Whoa.
He's out of the shed.
He's out of the shed. He found his keys. He made his way out of the shed.
Yeah. And straight into the Foreign Office.
Straight at the top of the board.
Straight into the top of the board as well, as you say. Yeah, I don't even think we need to explain it anymore. I think we've
talked about
explained it more than enough. Yeah, so that's where he is.
Rory, your loser of the week.
My loser of the week is new to the board.
New entry.
And someone I'm surprised we haven't had before. Xi Jinping, the
Xi
Chinese
Jinping.
premier.
Trump.
Donald Trump down there. Yeah, so I've got two sort of reasons for this. One's a kind of slightly longer term thing where there's been this kind of series of Chinese ministers disappearing for a while and then getting removed from their kind of cabinet positions.
Sure.
Two in the last few months have been Li Shangfu and Qin Gang, defense minister or former defense minister and former foreign minister. Very high profile people kind of who were raised up under Xi Jinping, but they've gone not for any official reason, but speculation about corruption and affairs and all sorts of things. So it's a pretty bad look. Especially when you've got like 2 months of no defense minister and no one really says anything. And also there's also just some general economic bad news for China. I think their property market's a bit sluggish and growth isn't as high as people want it to be.
Yeah.
If Zach was here, he'd have lots more to say about that.
Sure.
But basically, bad economic vibes from China.
Bad
so
vibes.
that's also why it's going down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ben, your loser of the week.
Yeah, bad vibes as well.
Bad
Rishi
vibes.
Sunak.
No, he's hit the bottom. He's hit the Modi
bottom.
tier.
He has.
Wow.
He's almost off screen. He's got so low.
He's had just a shocker.
That's fair.
Absolute
That's
shocker
totally
of the
fair.
week, which we've discussed. I know that it's quite boring because you've come in and you've given very very detailed explanations to each of them, and I've just gone.
Look what I just said. There you go.
Yeah, so I do feel bad, but I think it makes sense.
I feel obliged to point out one slight kind of spark of joy for Rishi Sunak this week. Doesn't really outweigh other things perhaps, but he met his inflation target of halving inflation this year, so
4.6%.
I thought you were going to say something like it was his dog's birthday or something.
No. Actually, I shouldn't downplay it too much.
That's
it's quite
pretty
a
good.
big deal that inflation has come down, but some would say it's more of the Bank of England's responsibility to deal
Some
with
would also
inflation.
say it doesn't overwrite all of the rest of the stuff we talked about.
Yeah.
But it's a good point.
Yeah.
It's a nice tweet.
Yeah.
And who says we're not balanced?
Yeah.
There we go.
That's the end.
I think that was a good one.
That was a cracker.